On my 22nd birthday, my grandmother fixed me with a steady stare across a white tablecloth and said, "For your birthday, I bought you a $36 million hotel." I laughed because who delivers something like that without even smiling? But then she slid a leather portfolio across the table. Inside, I saw the deed, the emerald, my name already printed on it, the signatures, the valuation, everything finalized. "At midnight, it transfers to you," she said calmly. "You own it outright, all 36 million. Don't thank me, just don't be stupid with it." I'm Sophia Reed, and in that moment, I went from a recent NYU graduate to the legal owner of one of Brooklyn Heights' most famous boutique hotels before I'd even finished my birthday dessert. Then my grandmother added one more sentence, one that should have warned me what was coming next. "Your mother doesn't know yet. I wanted you to hear it from me first." By the time I returned to the midtown penthouse where I'd grown up, my phone was blowing up with missed calls and messages. Every light in the apartment was on. My mother stood in the living room, fully done up in makeup and a designer dress. Her new husband stood beside her, planted like hired security. They already knew. They talked about family legacy, about managing it together, about how I was too young, too naive, how they could relieve the pressure by stepping in. When I said, "No, I'm the sole owner and that's not changing," my mother's face went icy. "Then pack your bags and get out of my house," she said. No negotiation, no hesitation. As I stuffed my life into 2 suitcases, hands shaking despite my efforts to stay calm, my grandmother appeared in the doorway. She looked almost amused. "Before you decide what to do with that hotel," she said, "you need to see what I've been keeping on your mother's new husband. If you think getting kicked out over a $36 million hotel is bad, wait until you hear what my grandmother had already uncovered about the man who thought he could take it." The thing about being thrown out of your own home over a $36 million hotel is that it doesn't happen slowly. It happens in 3 sentences. My mother looked at me from across the living room, her expression perfectly smooth beneath a layer of expensive makeup, and repeated, "If you won't let us manage the emerald as a family, then you don't live here. Pack your bags, Sophia." Her new husband just stood there, hands in his pockets, wearing that calm corporate smile that made my skin crawl. Up until that night, I had always called her Mom, and I had thought of him as the new guy. But after that ultimatum, they became who they truly were. Elizabeth Reed, the woman who loved her lifestyle more than her daughter, and Victor Hale, the man who had married into our family 7 months earlier and was already talking like he owned a piece of my inheritance. I tried to reason with her once. "You can't be serious. You're kicking me out because Grandma gave me something with my name on it." Elizabeth didn't even blink. "I'm teaching you a lesson about respect. My house, my rules. And rule number 1 is that we make big decisions together. You want to play boss with that hotel?" she said coldly. "Then do it without living off me." Victor stepped in then, his voice soft, patronizing. "Sophia, nobody's trying to take anything from you. Operational control, brand strategy, investor relations, that's our world. You'd still be the face. We'd just be behind the scenes, making sure you don't drown." It was the way he said "our world," like I was some clueless kid who should be grateful just to be included. That settled it for me. "No," I said, "the emerald is mine. I'm not signing anything. I'm not sharing control. I'll figure it out without you." Elizabeth's smile vanished, completely. "Then you can figure out where you're sleeping tonight, too." 10 minutes later, I was upstairs ripping clothes off hangers, cramming my life into 2 suitcases and a carry-on. The penthouse suddenly felt like a stage set I'd been shoved off of. Every designer dress in my closet was something she'd chosen. Every piece of furniture downstairs had been selected to fit her image. And now I realized none of it had ever truly been ours. I was zipping up the second suitcase when I heard the elevator doors open again. A moment later, my grandmother walked into my room like she owned the building. "Well," she said dryly, taking in the half-packed chaos, "that escalated exactly the way I thought it would." This was the first time I'd ever seen her look more amused than angry at one of my mother's blow-ups. "You knew she'd kick me out?" I asked. "I knew she'd choose her comfort over your autonomy if someone clever enough whispered in her ear," my grandmother said, "and Victor Hale is very good at whispering." She set her Birkin on the bed, reached inside and pulled out a plain brown envelope. "Before you move into my guest room and we figure out how to keep you from being eaten alive, you need to understand what you're actually up against." Inside were copies of bank statements from a shell corporation in the Bahamas, wire transfers in the hundreds of thousands, printed emails. On one of them, the subject line contained 4 words that made my stomach drop. Emerald Acquisition Strategy Timeline. The body of the email laid it out with clinical precision. Once I inherited the emerald, the plan was to pressure me into signing over management, restructure operations, sell off assets, and eventually unlock the full redevelopment potential of the site. Victor's name sat neatly at the bottom. "He married Elizabeth because of this," my grandmother said quietly. "Not for her, for the hotel, for you." I stared at the pages, the dates, the figures, the casual way he described dismantling the only thing my grandmother had ever built specifically for me. "Does Mom know?" I asked. "That," Margaret Reed said, her voice sharpening, "is what I've been trying to figure out, which is why you are not going to confront either of them yet. Let them think they scared you into running. Let them underestimate you. Predators always make mistakes when they're confident their prey is helpless." I was still holding the envelope when my phone lit up on the nightstand. My mother's name flashed again and again, calls and texts stacking on top of each other. For the first time in my life, I let them go unanswered. Because for the first time, I understood I wasn't the only one being played, and I wasn't going to be their easiest target. My mother called again the next morning at 7:30, and I almost let it go to voicemail like all the others. I was in my grandmother's guest room, half awake, Victor's email envelope still sitting on the nightstand. My phone screen kept lighting up, "Mom," over and over again. Eventually, more out of morbid curiosity than hope, I answered. "Sophia," she said, her voice thin, stripped of its usual polish. "We need to talk, now. Without Victor." I'd never heard her sound like that. "About what?" I asked. "About Grandma? About Victor? About the hotel?" "I can't explain on the phone," she said quickly. "Meet me at the cafe by the south entrance of Central Park in an hour. Come alone." She hung up before I could say yes or no. An hour later, I was sitting across from her at a tiny metal table, watching Elizabeth Reed unravel in broad daylight. No makeup, oversized sunglasses, her hair scraped back like she'd run out the door without thinking. Her hands shook as she lifted her coffee. "He's not who I thought he was," she said without preamble. "I know you have no reason to believe me right now, but you need to see this." She slid an iPad across the table, already open to a folder labeled Insurance. I tapped the screen and froze. Page after page of reports appeared. Not about Victor, not about business, about me. Daily schedules, screenshots of my bank accounts, photos taken from across streets and through cafe windows, notes about who I met, how long I stayed, even what time I usually left my NYU dorm freshman year. "He's been watching you for 18 months, my mother whispered. "Before we met at that charity gala, before the engagement, before the wedding. He targeted me because of you, because of Margaret, because of the emerald." My stomach turned as I kept scrolling. There were financial projections outlining how leveraging the Reed assets could fund an entire portfolio of developments up and down the East Coast, draft contracts for a Miami-based security and risk management firm that bragged about handling difficult property disputes. The same name from the emails in my grandmother's envelope. "Why are you only showing me this now?" I asked. "Because I only found it last night," she said, looking like she might actually be sick. "He keeps that iPad in a safe in his office," she said. "I always thought it was tax records or boring legal files I didn't want to deal with. I knew the combination. I went in there after you left because I thought maybe anything might prove he wasn't the monster Margaret says he is." She let out a single humorless laugh. "Instead, I found proof he's worse." I swiped to another folder, one labeled Contingencies. That's where I saw it. A scanned copy of my mother's prenup with Victor, several sections highlighted in yellow. "He insisted on it," she said quietly, "said it was to protect his investors, that his lawyer and mine had both agreed. I skimmed it, Sophia. I signed it. I believed him." One paragraph was highlighted 3 separate times. Buried in dense legal language, it spelled out that if the marriage ended within 2 years and Victor could demonstrate financial harm, he'd be entitled to compensation from community assets, including but not limited to any property, inheritance, or gifts acquired by immediate family during the marriage period. I didn't need a law degree to do that math. "The emerald transferred to me 3 days ago," I said slowly. "The ink on the deed isn't even dry." "So if I divorce him now," my mother said bitterly, "he gets to claim the hotel as part of his harm, or at the very least drag us into court long enough to freeze everything and convince a judge to appoint a temporary manager so nothing reckless happens." "He doesn't need you to sign a single piece of paper," I said. "No, he built the trap before you even knew there was a game." My phone buzzed on the table. A new text from Victor appeared on the lock screen, like he'd heard his name spoken aloud. "Tell your mother she's terrible at hiding things. Have her put my iPad back where it belongs." Another message followed seconds later. "Actually, let's talk about all of this properly. Breakfast tomorrow. The Emerald rooftop. Just you and me. Don't be late." My mother saw the messages and went pale. "He knows," she breathed. "He knows I went into the safe." For the first time since I'd sat down, she looked at me without any veneer left. "Sophia, please," she said. "Give the hotel back to your grandmother. Put it in a trust. Leave New York for a while. I don't care where. Just get away from him until we understand what he's capable of." I stared at the screen, at his casual tone, at the ugly satisfaction behind every word. My grandmother's voice from the night before echoed in my head. Predators make mistakes when they're confident. "No," I said, "I'm not running." He picked the wrong granddaughter to stalk. That afternoon, back at Margaret Reed's dining table, we spread everything out. The prenup, the surveillance reports, the contracts with the security firm. My grandmother read the key clause once, then again, her lips tightening. "He's positioned himself to take control even if you refuse to sign anything," she said. "He thinks he's untouchable." Her eyes lifted to mine, suddenly sharp and bright. "So tomorrow morning, you're going to that rooftop breakfast. You're going to smile, you're going to listen, and you're going to let him talk. And while he does, we're going to quietly turn this little prenup trick of his into the biggest mistake of his career." I wore jeans, a silk blouse, and the watch my grandmother had given me on my 18th birthday. If I was going to sit across from the man who'd been stalking me for over a year, I wanted at least one thing on my body that felt like armor. Before I left the house, Margaret stopped me at the door and pressed a slim silver pen into my hand. "Recording," she said. "Turn the clip at the top until you hear the click. Put it in your pocket. Let him talk." The elevator ride up to the Emerald's rooftop felt longer than every year of my life combined. The staff greeted me with, "Good morning, Ms. Reed," like nothing was wrong, like my entire existence hadn't been reduced to spreadsheets and prenup clauses. Victor was already seated at the best table, of course. His back was to the skyline, facing the entrance so he could watch me arrive. He stood as soon as he saw me, wearing the same effortless charm he used in society photos and charity galas. "Sophia," he said, opening his arms as if he expected a hug. "Happy belated birthday." I stopped just out of reach, slipped the pen into the pocket of my blouse, and said, "Let's not pretend we're a family right now."
His smile didn't flicker. "Direct. I respect that. Sit. We have a lot to cover, and not much time before the lawyers start waking up." I sat. A server poured coffee I hadn't asked for. Victor folded his hands on the table, like this was a performance review. "I assume your mother showed you the prenup," he said, "and the, let's call it, due diligence I did on you and your grandmother." "We saw everything," I replied. "The surveillance, the shell companies, the security firm, the part where you literally labeled a folder, Emerald Acquisition Strategy. Subtle." He chuckled, completely unbothered. "I'll admit naming isn't my strong suit. Planning, though, that I'm very good at, which is why we're here." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm going to offer you something reasonable, Sophia, something that lets everyone walk away with their dignity and their bank accounts intact." I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch until he filled it, which he did. "The emerald stays in your name," he said. "On paper, you're the sole owner. The press gets their inspirational story about the young heiress taking over her grandmother's legacy. Meanwhile, operational control transfers to a management company I've already set up. They handle finances, renovations, strategic planning. You cash your checks and show up for photo ops." "In other words," I said, "I hand you the steering wheel and sit in the back seat while you drive my grandmother's life's work into a crane." "In other words," he replied smoothly, "you avoid turning that lovely prenup into a live grenade. If your mother files for divorce right now, I argue financial harm. Judges in this city don't like chaotic rich people. They love freezing assets. A temporary independent manager gets appointed for the emerald, so nobody makes any rash decisions. And guess who the only person in this equation is with a proven track record in real estate operations?" He paused, then smiled. "Hint, it's not the 22-year-old art history grad." For a moment, I forgot to breathe. It was exactly what my grandmother had predicted, but hearing him lay it out so casually, like a weather report, made it real in a way the paperwork hadn't. Why go through all this trouble for one hotel? It's valuable, but it's not $400 million. His eyes sharpened, pleased that I'd done the math. "You're right, the hotel isn't the play. The dirt underneath it is." He gestured toward the edge of the rooftop, toward Brooklyn Heights beyond. "I already have soft agreements with 4 other property owners on this block. A bookstore whose owner is in her 80s, a fitness studio behind on rent, 2 brownstones that need more work than they're worth," he continued. "Put them together with your parcel, and suddenly we're not talking about a cute little boutique hotel, we're talking about a world-class mixed-use development, residences, retail, a private club. 400 million easily, maybe 5. "And the people who already live and work here?" I asked. "The ones you've been harassing with your security firm?" He didn't flinch. "They'll land on their feet. They always do. Neighborhoods change, Sophia. That's not villainy, that's economics." He took a sip of coffee, then finally let the smile fall away. "Here's the part where you stop pretending this is a debate. You have 72 hours. You sign over operational control to my company, and I make sure your mother's divorce is clean. I waive any claims under the prenup. No frozen accounts, no public spectacle. You get to be the gracious granddaughter preserving the emerald soul while professionals handled the boring parts. Or," he continued, "you refuse, and I do exactly what I told you. I drag this into court. I use every clause, every connection, every inspector and permit office I know to turn your life with that hotel into a slow, expensive nightmare. You'll watch occupancy drop,
bills pile up, public perception sour, and eventually you'll come back to me and beg me to take it off your hands for a fraction of what it's worth. Or, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart pounded against the pen in my pocket, I go public with all of this: the stalking, the prenup trap, the intimidation of small business owners. Maybe none of it is technically illegal yet, I said, but I'm pretty sure a $400 million project can't survive being branded as one long con pulled on a college student and her grandmother. For the first time since I'd sat down, his jaw tightened. It was subtle, but I caught it. "You'd burn your own mother's reputation just to get to me?" he asked. "You'd turn her into a punchline on every gossip site in the city?" "You did that the second you used her as a doorway," I replied. "I'm just deciding whether I let you walk back out." He stood, adjusting his cufflinks like this was just another meeting to check off a list. 72 hours, Sophia. After that, this stops being a conversation and becomes a process, and I'm very good at processes. He walked away, leaving his untouched breakfast on the table between us. I stayed there for a full minute after he disappeared, fingers curled tight around the recording pen in my pocket. Then I pulled out my phone and called my grandmother. "He admitted everything," I said the moment she answered, "and he thinks the court is going to hand me my hotel." Margaret didn't sound surprised. "Good," she said. "Let him think that. Bring me the recording. If Victor Hale wants to play process, we'll show him what happens when he's not the only one who knows how to run a plan from start to finish." 2 days later, I found out exactly how serious Victor was about that whole process thing. It started with a call from my mother's lawyer to my grandmother's house, the kind of call that makes everyone at the table fall silent before it's even answered. I watched Margaret put the phone on speaker and say, "This is Margaret Reed," in the tone that usually makes people straighten up on the other end. "We've got a problem," the attorney said. "Victor filed for legal separation yesterday and simultaneously moved for emergency relief. He's claiming financial exposure tied to your recent transfer of the emerald to Sophia." My stomach dropped. "He really moved that fast?" I asked. "The man doesn't let the ink dry," the lawyer replied. "He's asking the court to freeze any major transactions related to the emerald and to appoint a temporary independent manager so that, and I quote, "an inexperienced young heir doesn't inadvertently destroy the value of a key marital asset while emotions are high." "The hotel isn't a marital asset," I snapped. "It was never his. It was never my mother's. It's mine." "I agree with you," the lawyer said. "But until we argue that in front of a judge, what matters is the narrative he's selling this morning. He filed first. That gives him a head start with the story." By late afternoon, we had an answer. A judge, probably thinking she was splitting the difference, granted a temporary order. No sale, no refinancing, no major renovations, no changes to the ownership structure without court approval, and most importantly, the emerald would be temporarily managed by an outside company, so no one in the family could act rashly. Margaret stared at the scanned order on her laptop, then pinched the bridge of her nose. "Let me guess," she said. "The outside company has a very boring, very familiar name." "Hale Property Services, LLC, the lawyer confirmed. "On paper, it meets the requirements. Existing company, prior management contracts. We can challenge it, but for at least a few weeks, maybe months, Sophia, he's legally in the driver's seat." I thought I was prepared for that. I wasn't. The next morning, I walked into my own hotel lobby and saw Victor standing there with a clipboard, flanked by 2 men in suits who definitely weren't part of my grandmother's original team. It felt like being pushed out of my own body. "Ms. Reed," he said, all professional courtesy now, none of the faux family warmth. "Per the court's order, I'm assuming interim operational control. Naturally, you're welcome to remain involved in a consultative capacity." Consultative capacity?
My grandmother's staff stood nearby, watching closely, trying to gauge exactly how afraid they were supposed to be. I forced my voice to stay steady. This is still my hotel. My name is still on the deed. Don't forget that. No one's forgetting, Victor replied smoothly. We're just making sure it doesn't accidentally become worthless while everyone works through their feelings. The changes started small, the way rot always does. Vendors we'd worked with for years received abrupt termination notices. Victor brought in his own preferred partners, all of them larger, more expensive, and far less local. Housekeeping hours were cut, front desk staff were told to upsell aggressively or start looking for work elsewhere. Guest complaints began to trickle in. Long wait times, strange policy changes, the atmosphere shifting from intimate to transactional. He's doing it on purpose, I told Margaret that night, pacing her kitchen. If he can make the numbers look unstable for a quarter or two, he'll walk into court and say, "See, I told you the kid couldn't handle it. Give full control to my company permanently, or this asset will suffer." Of course he's doing it on purpose, she said. The real question is whether we let him get away with it. She slid a new stack of papers across the table. While he was playing checkers with family court, she went on, I went back to playing chess with our friend Leonard Russo. The files she showed me weren't about us at all. They were about a strip mall in Florida that had mysteriously burned down just before a major insurance payout, about a warehouse in New Jersey that suffered a suspicious electrical failure right after the owner refused a buyout offer, about a hotel in Miami where guests were harassed and staff intimidated until the family sold for half of what it was worth. In every case, the same two entities appeared quietly in the background, Russo's development funds and the security and risk management firm Victor had hired. You see the pattern? Margaret asked. Russo bankrolls the project, the security firm leans on anyone who won't sell, something bad happens. On paper, it's all unfortunate coincidence. Off paper, everyone in the industry knows exactly who's behind it. They just can't prove it. So how do we prove it? I asked. By giving the people who care about proving things more than we do a clean trail to follow, she said. I called an old contact at the bureau. They've had Russo on their radar for years, but could never tie him directly to the intimidation. Then your friend, Victor, started wiring money from his Bahamas shell straight into that same security firm's accounts, labeled consulting fees. She paused, letting it sink in. The agent nearly sent me flowers. Then she continued, calm and precise. Here's the play. While Victor enjoys his little moment as court-appointed king of the Emerald, we go talk to your neighbors. We collect every story, every text, every late-night visit from his people. We build a record, she said. At the same time, my friends in law enforcement quietly watch what his people do next. Now that they think a judge has blessed their setup, if they so much as bump a lock or accidentally trigger a fire alarm, it goes straight into the file. And in the meantime, I asked. In the meantime, Margaret said, you smile. You show up. You let the staff see you. You talk to every journalist, blogger, and guest who will listen about how much this place means to the community. Because when we pull the trigger on this, we're not just going after Victor in court. We're going to make sure that when his name hits the news, he's radioactive in every boardroom he's ever set foot in. I thought about the hotel. The rooftop garden, the art on the walls, the small businesses pressed in around it, all part of the same ecosystem. For the first time since this started, I stopped thinking like someone who'd been handed a hotel and started thinking like someone fighting for a block, a neighborhood, a legacy. Fine, I said. If he wants a process, we'll give him one. But when this is over, I don't just want my hotel back. I want him wishing he'd never heard my name read. If Victor thought a judge's temporary order and a clipboard made him untouchable, the next week proved just how wrong he was.
The first crack in his control appeared as a trembling older woman who shuffled into the Emerald's lobby, clutching a canvas tote and a folder of papers. I recognized her from Margaret's files before she even introduced herself. "You must be Dorothy Park," I said, guiding her to a quiet corner of the lounge. "My grandmother says you own the bookstore on the corner." Her grandson, a college kid in a faded band t-shirt, hovered behind her, looking like he wanted to fight someone and throw up at the same time. "They've been following him," Dorothy said, pushing the folder toward me. Inside were photos of a black SUV parked across from their shop, screenshots of anonymous texts warning her grandson it wasn't safe for his grandmother to walk alone at night, and a copy of a police report that had gone nowhere. "They keep telling us the neighborhood is changing," she said, "that it might be time to cash out while we still can. I've owned that shop for 40 years. It's not just a line on a spreadsheet." 2 days later, Maya Lopez from the Pilates studio down the block showed up with a flash drive full of security footage. Grainy black and white videos showed 2 men in hoodies tampering with her front door lock, fiddling with the alarm panel, leaving what looked like flyers but turned out to be blank pieces of paper folded into her door handles at 3 in the morning. Then there was the little cafe on the corner that suddenly started getting surprise inspections once a week, always from people who never left a business card. Every story fit the same pattern from Margaret's Florida and New Jersey files: pressure, coincidental harassment, a steady drumbeat designed to make owning property feel like a liability. We laid everything out on the dining room table at Margaret's house one night. My recordings of Victor's rooftop threats played softly from a laptop, while printouts of texts, police reports, and wire transfers formed a paper mosaic of his scheme. When the FBI agent Margaret knew arrived, suit slightly off the rack, eyes razor sharp, he didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. "I'll be honest," he said, flipping through the bank records. "We've been trying to nail Russo on this kind of thing for years. Your boyfriend Victor handing us a direct funding trail from his shell company to the security firm? That's a gift." "He's not my boyfriend," I said a little too quickly. "He's my mother's mistake." The agent smiled faintly. "Even better. Here's how this works, Miss Reed. We're opening a broader case on Russo and his associates. We'll quietly monitor what his people do around the Emerald and your block. Keep collecting incidents, keep your neighbors talking," the agent said, "but don't expect a raid tomorrow. We build these cases slowly, or they fall apart on appeal." "We don't have slowly," I said. "He's actively running my hotel into the ground so he can tell a judge I'm incompetent." "Which is why," Margaret cut in smoothly, "we're not relying on the law alone. That's your part," she told the agent. "The rest is ours." The next step was the one Victor never saw coming, because men like him never believe the court of public opinion is a real court until it's too late. Margaret called a real estate reporter at the New York Times she'd known since he was an intern. I called a friend who ran a mid-size Instagram account focused on New York neighborhoods and gentrification. We didn't leak everything at once. We let the story build. First came the human angle, a piece about a beloved Brooklyn Heights bookstore and a Pilates studio facing anonymous pressure to sell, mysterious SUVs, unexplained safety concerns. And neighborhoods they loved. Then we added the next layer. I agreed to an on-the-record interview using my full name. I talked about inheriting the Emerald, about my mother's sudden marriage to Victor, about the prenup clause that conveniently gave him a path to my property if their relationship imploded. I didn't accuse him of a crime. I didn't need to. I simply described his concerns about my inexperience and his eagerness to temporarily step in. The fact that a judge had already granted his company interim control did the rest. The article that ran 3 days later was brutal in its politeness. "Complex legal battle over Brooklyn boutique hotel raises questions about power and inheritance," the headline read. But the takeaway was much simpler. To anyone reading, Victor looked like exactly what he was,
a calculated opportunist using the courts to pry a hotel out of a young woman's hands. I posted a video the same day, standing on the Emerald's rooftop with the Brooklyn skyline behind me. In it, I told the story the way I would have told it to a friend. My 22nd birthday, the deeds slid across the table, my mother's "pack your bags" ultimatum, the emails labeled Emerald Acquisition Strategy. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I just explained what it feels like to realize someone married into your family for the dirt beneath your grandmother's hotel. Within 24 hours, the video crossed 1 million views. By 48, people were duetting it, stitching it, arguing in the comments about real estate ethics and predatory development. Someone unearthed old photos of Victor at charity galas with Russo. Someone else dug up a lawsuit tied to a strip mall in Florida that had burned down in circumstances that suddenly looked very familiar. The narrative Victor thought he controlled in family court slipped completely out of his hands online. Investors notice that kind of thing. So do city council members. So do banks. A quiet source emailed us an internal chain from one of Victor's major backers, politely pausing their involvement in the Brooklyn Heights project until recent allegations could be reviewed. Then came the call from my mother's lawyer. Victor's team just reached out asking to revisit the management arrangement. He said, he's feeling the heat. But before any revisiting could happen, the FBI made their move. There was no dramatic dawn raid, just 2 agents waiting at JFK near a private terminal, a warrant in hand. When Victor tried to board a flight to the Bahamas for business, the charges weren't just about me or the Emerald. They were about the Florida fires, the Jersey warehouse, a pattern of intimidation and fraud stretching back years. My rooftop recordings, his wire transfers to the security firm, the neighbors' stories, they were all threads in a much larger net. When the news broke, it felt surreal. One minute, he was sending smug legal emails through his attorney. The next, his mugshot was lighting up my phone beneath a chyron announcing real estate fraud and extortion charges. Russo was arrested a week later, his empire suddenly looking much smaller once the words racketeering and organized scheme started appearing in print. The judge who had signed the temporary management order for the Emerald moved quickly once the indictments hit. The prenup was frozen pending a fraud review. Hale Property Services was removed as interim manager. The court did something Victor never believed it would do. It handed operational control back to me, noting in its order that recent developments had called his good faith into serious question. I stood in the lobby the morning the change became official, watching the staff exhale in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. Margaret stepped up beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You got your hotel back?" she asked. "No," I said, looking past the marble floors and polished brass, to the bookstore on the corner, the studio down the street, the cafe with the always fogged windows. "We got our block back." And for the first time since my birthday dinner, it didn't feel like I was just holding on to something my grandmother had built. It felt like I had fought for it. The funny thing about revenge is that when you finally get it, it doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like being able to breathe again. Weeks after Victor's arrest, after the headlines moved on to the next scandal, after his lawyers stopped sending desperate little feelers through my mother's attorney, life didn't snap back to normal. There was no normal anymore. There was only whatever comes after you've watched your family nearly sell your future for comfort and watched a man go to jail for underestimating you. Elizabeth asked to meet me at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, the kind of place she used to ignore because it wasn't seen enough. She showed up in jeans and a sweater. No glam team, no performance. For a minute, we just sat there. 2 people who shared blood and a long list of bad decisions. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said finally, fingers wrapped tight around her mug. "I just need you to know I see it now," she continued. "How much of my life I spent trying to buy safety with someone else's money, and how blind that made me to what Victor was really doing." I didn't give her a tearful speech. I told her the truth. "You hurt me," I said.
You chose him over me until it was almost too late. You kicked me out for refusing to hand over what Grandma gave me. That doesn't disappear just because he turned out to be worse than you thought." She flinched, but she didn't look away. "I know," she said. "I'm in therapy 3 times a week trying to understand why I thought being chosen by a man was the same thing as being safe. I can't undo what I did to you. All I can do is stop letting men like Victor through the door, and show up when you ask, even if it's just for coffee." It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It was an admission of guilt and a plan to be different. So I gave her what I could. "We're not okay yet," I said, "but I'm willing to see who you are when you're not hiding behind someone else's last name." We started small. Weekly coffees where we talked about boring things, traffic, new restaurants, the dog she adopted instead of another husband. She came to the Emerald sometimes, not as the woman who thought she could run it better than me, but as a guest who sat in the lobby and watched the world go by. The hotel itself changed too. I hired a general manager who cared more about hospitality than margins, a director of community outreach who built partnerships with local schools and arts programs. We hosted readings in the courtyard for Dorothy's bookstore, gave Maya's studio a standing discount on room blocks for retreats, opened the rooftop for neighborhood fundraisers. The Emerald stopped feeling like a prize you could win or lose in court and started feeling like what my grandmother had always wanted it to be, a living, breathing part of the city. Margaret softened a little after everything, but only around the edges. She still barked at suppliers who tried to slip in hidden fees, still shredded any contract that smelled even faintly like Victor, but there were more evenings where she'd sit with me on the rooftop, watching the river lights, telling stories about deals she'd made in the 70s with nothing but nerve and a cheap suit. One night, 6 months after the sentencing, she nodded toward the lit-up sign that read, "The Emerald," and said, "You know, I didn't leave you this place to see if you could keep it. I left it to you to see if you'd learn when to fight for it." I thought about the girl I'd been at that birthday dinner, blinking at a deed she didn't feel ready for. She would have handed the whole thing over just to keep the peace. She would have believed that older automatically meant wiser, that family automatically meant safe. I wasn't that girl anymore. If there was a lesson in all of this, it wasn't that money corrupts or that you can't trust anyone. It was that love without boundaries is just an invitation for people like Victor to walk in and rearrange your life, and that saying no, to a parent, to a partner, to a system that tells you to sit down and be grateful, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and for everyone tied to you. My grandmother gave me a $36 million hotel, and my mother's new husband tried to take control of it. In the end, what I kept wasn't just the building or the land, it was the knowledge that I could be outnumbered, underestimated, even temporarily overruled, and still find a way to fight back without becoming like the people I was fighting. That, more than any balance sheet or appraisal, is the part of this legacy I plan on protecting.